Welcome to Feed Your Wild, an immersive journey to help you remember your own medicine and awaken your intuitive healing gifts. I'm Vanessa Rodriguez, and join us for heart-centered, real conversations exploring intuition and spirituality, health and wellness, astrology, herbalism, and nature-based practices that will transform your health and life. Our mission is to inspire, empower you, and help you expand your spiritual and intuitive connection to its fullest expression so that we can build a more beautiful world together. Get ready to feed all parts of your wild self. Hello, welcome back to the Feed Your Wild podcast. And I'm so happy you're here, whether you are an OG listener of the Feed Your Wild podcast or you're a newbie. Hello, welcome. Today you made it to our birthday party. This special day marks the 6th anniversary of the Feed Your Wild podcast. Well, actually, it was April 26th. So we had our anniversary over the weekend, but I wanted to spend some time to really sink into that day and to gather thoughts and emotions and feels and really like what it is that I want to share about this podcast, the past 6 years, and this time, which I feel also coincides with some pretty pivotal moments in my own life personally, and I know in so many others. So first, before I dive into today's episode, I did want to share that in honor of the Feed Your Wild podcast's birthday and Mercury going direct and post-eclipse season, Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, and post-full moon in Scorpio integration period. Oh my God, so much. How are you doing? We made it. I wanted to celebrate by offering a special discount off of my Akashic Soul Record readings. Those are one-on-one readings, private, and Awaken and Aligned channeled readings for the first 6 clients who grab your spot for either the one-on-one private Akashic Soul Record reading or a pre-recorded Awaken and Align channeled reading. Let me share the difference between the two. The Akashic Soul Record reading is a 60-minute one-on-one private channeled reading that happens over Zoom, audio only. This is the reading where you get live guidance through the Akashic Records, which can provide unlimited guidance and are always available for inspiration in your life. They act as a roadmap or a GPS that can guide you on your soul's journey. And really, it's the perfect complement to any healing work that you might already be doing. So if your soul is craving clarity and guidance with a bespoke intuitive reading with wisdom from your Akashic guides, and you want the ability to be an active participant and ask and engage questions in real time with me, then this is your jam. You can reconnect with the core essence of who you are, your soul's purpose and path, to gain insights and clarity on old patterns, beliefs, blockages, and also to receive healing tools and insights on that path. So books are closing for the summer. If you want to get your spot in, I suggest that you do so ASAP. And this discount of 25% off is only available until May 1st, Beltane end of day. The code for that is FYW for Feed Your Wild, FYW 6 years. That's the number 6. The code is provided to you in the show notes below. So if you're thinking about it, this is the time. And the second type of reading is the Awaken and Align Akashic Channeling. This is a pre-recorded 30-minute bespoke channeled reading. The major difference is that this is specifically focused on supporting you through your awakening and alignment process as you move through this year. And there are 3 themes that you can select. One is identifying your core wounds and how to alchemize them. The second is awakening your intuitive gifts for the journey ahead. And the third is aligning with your purpose and path. And to get an idea of what these are like, you can tune into any one of the Akashic Soul Nourishment channeled readings on the Feed Your Wild podcast. And that'll give you a little insight into the channeled portion of what's going to come through for you. So there's a channeled portion. And then I also dive into your human design and astrology through your natal chart and get some more insight there. You will need to provide your exact birth time if you want more information through your human design and astrology. It's really required to get an accurate reading. So if you have that available, it's usually on your birth certificate, then this is the reading for you. And these have become a favorite. They sell out pretty quickly. And if you are wanting a reading but can't quite access the Akashic Soul Record private reading, then go for the Awaken and Aligned. And I look forward to doing these readings for you. Again, that 25% off ends tomorrow, Beltane, May 1, end of day. So go to wildlyrooted.com/Akashic Records to learn more and select your reading. All right, so there is quite a bit that I had actually wanted to share, but I thought, what is going to be the most fun and with an element of surprise and maybe useful, also educational, something that you can actually work with and utilize in your own life? Because this podcast is really also all about bringing the luminous and the numinous into the practical. So I started looking at patterns of what are my clients, my students working through right now that's most common. What am I hearing through social media, through emails, and what am I also moving through? And the through line, I feel like, is sort of this. I feel this time has really been a pivot point for so many people. And of course, it's not just isolated to this time. It's been over the years, a lot of change has come. But I feel that this year, and especially this springtime and this month of April, has been such a crucible for radical shifts in specific areas of people's lives, and sometimes their entire life gets turned inside out. So in these moments, it can be really challenging to feel like you have a clear path forward. And sometimes we feel like we're pushing, we're efforting, and it's futile. Like literally things aren't rolling the way that we imagine them to be or in a flow state. I know a lot of people that I've connected with are sort of in this either tower card space where literally things are breaking down so that the foundation can be rebuilt, or in a hanged man space, so to speak, where there's sort of this pause, this holding pattern. And it's not so that we can just lie in angst, right, about not being able to move forward or not having clarity, but it's more to shift our perspective and really turn inward and to bring a lot of the work and the focus back inside internally. So that seems to be a theme. And one of the things that I thought in these times, what's really helpful, obviously, connecting with the Akashic Records, connecting with your intuitive guidance, and really amplifying those channels. But what if you are already working on something or you desire to create something, but there's maybe a little bit of confusion or a lack of trust, or you're not super clear on the direction or the pathway or even the purpose or the point of the thing? So let's say you are working on a creative piece of art, or you are wanting to birth a book or a body of work, of healing work. Maybe there's a new system or methodology that's stirring within you. Or perhaps it's just birthing a project that feels really important for you in this time or aligned. Maybe it's a podcast. And so I thought, wouldn't it be cool if I can share some of the top ways that I have really connected in with the purpose and path and direction of this project, the Feed Your Wild podcast, how it came to be, and how I utilize intuitive and esoteric tools and maps to help assist me in not just guiding me forward in terms of the work and what it looks like, but to help assist me as a steward of this body of work. Because ultimately, anything that you create will have a life of its own. And that is an impulse, a life force that wants to move through you and be birthed through you. So it has part of your signature and you are a steward of it. But once it leaves you and it enters the realm of the ethers, the world, the space, and the Akasha, then it is living. And it develops and evolves and grows in its own way, in a way that we can't control 100%, and we're not meant to. I have had a lot of students and clients ask me about how I knew to create a podcast, or how did I know what to talk about, or what to say for each episode, or what does my day-to-day look like behind it and the production and all of that. Those are wonderful logistical questions, but I think what's really at the foundation and underlying all of that is the relationship and building a deeper connection and understanding with this deva, or this energetic signature, living signature that is the Feed Your Wild podcast. I've talked about this in episodes past, but I go through a process of connecting with what I call the deva of my business, or soul work. Deva is a Sanskrit term to represent typically a feminine goddess or divine entity. But it really indicates any kind of spirit entity or being, like soul of something. That's a representation, like the consciousness that is connected to something. So for example, there are devas of flowers. There are devas of money. There's the deva of money. There's the deva of the city of Chicago, right? So anything that has been birthed and then has a life of its own has a deva. And this concept is not my own. It is from Hiro Boga, who is a mentor from afar for me for over the years. And she has a beautiful body of work that is, at the core of it, is really this relationship with the devas. So I learned to connect with my business deva, the deva, or the soul signature, if you will, the imprint, the signature imprint that is energetic, or the consciousness of my business. And then I have the sub-devas, if you will, that were birthed from this larger deva, which includes the Feed Your Wild podcast. So the Feed Your Wild podcast has its own deva, if you will, which is connected to the larger deva of my business. And I can open up the records of the Feed Your Wild podcast as well as my business, which I do. And that's one of the primary ways that I connect with these energy bodies or these consciousness fields. But the other way that I work with them is by looking at and getting very familiar with their natal chart, their astrological natal chart. You can also look at their human design. But for the purpose of today's episode, I thought it would be a fun case study, an exercise to share how I have really looked at and worked with the astrological blueprint through the Feed Your Wild podcast's natal chart, and share a little bit of how it has supported me in building a deeper relationship of trust, and also in direction, helping assist me in looking at the possibilities of the direction that the podcast wants to move in. So this will get technical in some parts, and I have included an image of the natal chart, the birth chart of the Feed Your Wild podcast. You can find that on my website for this particular episode, or in the show notes, you can click the link to access the information and where you can grab that image if you want to follow along and take notes. I would also recommend you maybe bookmarking this and coming back with your own natal chart and or the natal chart, the birth chart of something that you have birthed already. Obviously, you can't do it with something that you haven't birthed already because it's not in its expression yet. Some people have asked me, well, Vanessa, how do you know? How do you know the birth time and the details of the birth of your business or your podcast? So they are different. With the podcast, it's more straightforward. I knew where I was when I birthed it. I selected the period of time when it was out in its expression. So not when it was still, I did like recordings. I had the idea in my head. I did the recordings. I let up. So it was really the launch point when the first episodes went live. That's what I counted as it was birthed. So to me, that is akin to the crowning of the head of the child through the vagina is like, a child isn't fully here yet. The sun is coming up. It's not fully expressed yet. But it's when the entire body has released and is then separate from the body that birthed this child, that's the moment, that time is indicative of that expression, that signature. And so that's how I looked at it. And so I looked at, okay, well, what was the time that it actually went out into the world and it was published? So I have that as April 26, 2018. I was in Southern Oregon at the time. I'm going to keep some of this information private, so this specific city and some other elements that are throughout, just to save some privacy. But know the exact city and place where you were. And then the time was 1:30 a.m. And that was trackable, so that was pretty easy. When it came to my business, though, that's different because the way that I had looked at the birth, I created an entity that was, I incorporated, which is interesting, right? Because literally that word is to come into body, to incarnate, incorporation. So I utilized the date and the time of incorporation when my business became a legal entity of a corporation. And I knew the date because that date is given to you. It's in your papers, the legal papers, so to speak. But the time is not. So what I did was I utilized an intuitive process of basically whittling down to the exact time that it fully expressed. Now, this isn't necessarily through anything trackable with paperwork. Maybe I could get that if I did a lot of digging. I didn't think it was that important. And I really trust and work with my pendulum a lot with regards to these types of things. So that's what I utilized. I have a process where I can work with my own guides and my pendulum to pinpoint the exact time. And that is what I did for my business. And it turns out to be very accurate and very useful when I look at the natal chart. But today we're going to focus on the Feed Your Wild podcast. I just wanted to give you some sense or direction around how you can maybe discover or find what the exact time is for you, because that is going to render the most important information, because then you'll know the ascendant and a lot of other things like the house positionings and all of that. Okay, so feel free to just tune in and take what resonates and what doesn't. I really want to share this and this process so that you can find, oh, that's an interesting technique or thing to look at when it comes to identifying gifts or direction or expression or even quality of voice, personality, flavor, like all of that, the path and the purpose of this particular body of work. So let's get started, shall we? Okay, I'm going to break this down in terms of some of the basic first things that I look at that are really critical. And then we'll get into some fun stuff that maybe is a little bit above and beyond the typical natal chart of what we might look at in terms of just like beyond the regular planetary bodies that we usually work with. First things first is we look at the sun sign, the ascendant is the rising, and the moon sign. So the sun sign here is Taurus. The rising sign is Cancer. and the moon is Virgo. So I laughed when I first saw this chart a couple years ago because I myself, well, we all have all the signs in our chart, right? We all have the energetics of all the signs, but some houses don't have planets or like planetary emphasis, or there like aren't any aspects. And that's true for my own chart as it pertains to the regular planetary bodies. So when we think of just like the regular planets, none of my earth sign houses have anything in them. Now, when we start looking at asteroids and lots, which I'll get into in a moment, then that changes things a little bit and it makes things make more sense. But it doesn't mean that you don't have those earth energies. We all do. It's just they're not as emphasized as some of the others. That is true for me as a person in my own personal chart. But then when we look at the chart of my podcast, it's all earth. Like every single earth sign is like part of its primary makeup, which I think is hilarious because we make such a good team that way. Taurus is a fixed sign. So fixed signs are really wonderful for endurance, for going the long run, for making sure that things are sustaining. Sometimes it can also be expressed as stubbornness, but in its highest expression, it's a really great stubbornness. It's like this continuity that you can rely upon. And fixed energy is really gifted with incredible focus and loyalty and devotion. And so it's really great once you have created something and that sort of initial creation. The fixed energy signs are going to be helpful in continuing to sustain momentum and continue to build on a project. So that dedication and that step-by-step building moving forward. So this as a sun sign in Taurus has that energy. Then as the rising sign, well, first let me share what some of the fixed signs are in case you're looking at this. Fixed signs include Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius. So now when we look at the rising sign, and the rising sign is arguably one of the most important pieces of the chart because the rising sign is the most personalized sign. It's the moment when you are emerging from the body that birthed you and becoming your own being, like separate entity onto this material realm. It's the sign that was in the sky at the horizon when you emerged. So your sun sign is connected to like your spirit self, your spirit essence and your purpose and where you're going in life. But the rising sign, your ascendant, is like who you are, your body, your incarnated self. And it's also how others typically see you or how you present to others, where your sun sign can sometimes feel more like those that are most closest to you can recognize that more within you because that's who you truly are. Isn't quite accurate because I feel like they're all who you truly are, right? But it's sort of more of like this spiritual, spirit essence, self version of you. That's your sun. Whereas the rising is like how you show up and your full your embodied expression. So with Capricorn rising, Capricorn is a cardinal sign. And cardinal signs are the signs of birthing. Cardinal signs include Capricorn, Aries, Cancer, and Libra. This is the energy of initiation, of beginning things, of breathing new life into something, to get those wheels turning. It's like the spark that lights something up. There is an aura of leadership with cardinal archetypes or like a visionary capacity because they're sort of these initiators. I think we see this very much with Aries energy because it might be the most obvious, but it happens with Cancer, Libra, Capricorn. They all start a season as well. So this is wonderful for beginning projects, but it may not be as great for sustaining. So how many of you feel like you're really great at starting something, not so much at continuing with the marathon or finishing things? That's me. I raise my hand. I'm under that camp. And so that's where this fixed energy of Taurus can be really, really helpful. Once we get those wheels turning and that spark of initiation, then Taurus can take over, or any of like the fixed signs. Then the moon sign for future wild is Virgo. And Virgo is mutable sign, which really brings an element of ease and acceptance to continual change. Mutable signs include Virgo, Gemini, Sagittarius, and Pisces. So these are the signs that are more adaptable. They're okay with shifting moment to moment, season to season. They have a deep understanding of that space of transition and transformation. So they can embody adaptability and flexibility and openness and flow, which is, of course, of the utmost importance, as the only constant in life is change. And so mutable signs can teach us, we're not here to control and hold on to things. We are actually meant to be in a state of alignment and to flow with life. So I think having this balance is really beautiful in terms of the Future Wild podcast, and have it rooted actually in very earthly signs. So it's very practical, pragmatic material of this realm. And I feel like that's really what the podcast has set out to do. Next, I look at the first house, where our rising sign is, our ascendant. So the first house is ruled by Capricorn. And Future Wild also has a stellium in Capricorn, which means it has like 3 or more planetary bodies. And that means that there is a ton of energy in that first house and in the sign of Capricorn. It gives a lot of credence to those influences of Capricorn, that Capricornian influence and embodiment, literally, because it's the first house and the ascendant. And so we have Saturn, Mars, Pluto, the ascendant, and I also included the asteroid goddesses, the first asteroids that were discovered, which were named after goddesses. And we have Vesta in the first house as well. And I'm going to get into those in a moment. But those are what I'm talking about as sort of above and beyond, just like the regular way of looking at a natal chart, which can be kind of fun. It's important to also look at when we are looking at the houses. And we see that the first house is ruled by Capricorn for Future Wild. Well, who rules Capricorn? And I am going to go through and utilize the traditional rulers of the zodiac. I didn't mention this before, but I'm also using whole house signs, because there are different house systems. Like a very common one is Placidus, for example. That's sort of the default. But I come from a background where my first trainings and teachings in astrology were traditional, medical, and Hellenistic. All of those use whole house signs. And plus, it's just a pretty simple way of looking at things. So that's going to be my lens and orientation. But you can take anything that I'm saying today and use the house system that you enjoy the most. Like, we're house agnostic over here. So the first house is Capricorn, and we have this stellium here. And the traditional ruler of Capricorn is Saturn. So Saturn is inside of the first house, which is ruled by the sign that it rules. And planets really love that. It's kind of like when you go to your, like, let's say you had a childhood home that was really happy, and you just go back home and it feels really familiar and good and comfortable, and you feel like you could do a lot there. And simultaneously, like, your parents are really loving and hold such good space for you, right? They're such good hosts. So that's what this feels like when you have a planetary body that's sitting in the house of the sign that it rules. So this right away, this energy tells me that Future Wild is very comfortable in being itself, very confident, is initiatory, because there's a lot of emphasis in that first house. That's the house of self and body and character. It's like, here I am in all my glory, and I'm going to make shit happen because I'm a Capricorn and I start things and I am built to build, right? So there's definitely that kind of momentum and energy and stability. And then I'll bring in the energy of Vesta in a moment, but I'm going to hold on to that for just a little bit. So not only do we have all of these earth signs and sort of this balance in terms of the energies, but then we also have this packed first house in Capricorn. And the way that that has expressed for me as sort of like the steward or creator of the Feed Your World podcast is that honestly, sometimes I don't have that fixed energy of like being able to show up 100% of the time and do the thing. Sometimes I don't want to record the podcast episode. Well, here's another example. Before the podcast was birthed, I had a business for quite some time. My business launched in 2015, so it had already been 3 years. And I tried to stick with all the things. I tried to stick as a solopreneur and entrepreneur. You're supposed to do certain things and show up every day in doing them and do them regularly, consistently in order to build business. Well, that makes sense. Newsletter, email newsletter, weekly is usually suggested. I couldn't do that for the life of me. I could not commit to sending a weekly newsletter. Blogging, I couldn't do that. Social media, forget it. I was horrible. I still am pretty terrible with social media. Now, we could say, okay, Vanessa, let's modify our language around that. I'm just being real. I'm accepting the patterns of behavior that I had in my early entrepreneurship and business journey. There's a lot of other things, right? Like even outreach, regular networking, all of these things that just are business building practices, I was not consistent in until the podcast. And I couldn't understand why, but I was showing up every single day and week to week. That podcast had a weekly podcast every single week for the first 3 years. Every single week, without fail. The podcast is arguably way more complicated and challenging, harder to do and get out there than an email newsletter or a social media post, right? It didn't make logical sense. But here I was literally showing up like an employee, right, of this podcast. And still to this day, it is the one thing that has been consistent, and I have shown up regularly every time I'll say we say so. We have an editorial calendar. Yes, that shifts and fluxes and flows. That's part of the mutability with the Virgo moon. But the endurance, I had that cardinal Capricorn that was like, we're going to do this and we're going to do it well and we're going to commit. And then Taurus really stepping up and helping us in terms of the sustainability, right? And the endurance piece. Because podcasting is a marathon. Business building is a marathon. And that I understood that going into it. So when you're looking at your own chart or the chart of your body of work or your creation, I think it's really important to look at the balancing act with these different energies, mutable, fixed, cardinal. Let's be honest with ourselves. Do we need more support in terms of fixed energy, right? Do we need, maybe it's an assistant, maybe it's somebody else who can help. Maybe it's like a friend or someone's kid or your own kid who can help and do maybe some of the social media, and they have more of that fixed energy. They just show up. It's easier for them. That's what I'm talking about. How can we fill in the gaps, so to speak? And I feel like the podcast was actually, as it birthed itself and I birthed it, it assisted me in this way where it filled in gaps for me that I needed to fill. Maybe for you, it's not a podcast. Maybe it's a blog series. Maybe it's video. Maybe it's live events, but it has to fit within your own design and the impulse. So I didn't schedule this podcast to be birthed at that particular time so we can have this design, right? This is just literally what came through, and it just happened to work out, of course, synchronistically. But that's because I followed my gut. I followed, and I'm a 3-5 manifesting generator, sacral. So it literally, my gut response is how I'm meant to move through life. And that's what I did. I really just allowed my gut and my body to guide me in this process. And I encourage you to tune into your own inner authority, whatever that is, and trust it, because it is guiding you to birth or to make way for what's meant to come. So then I look at whether this is a day chart or a night chart. And this is important because it helps identify who the most important luminaries are, if you will. So the night chart or day chart is when your sun is above the descendant, so above the horizon line. That means that it was during the daytime. Whereas if it's a night chart, then it was after the sun has gone down past the horizon where you can't see it anymore. And my personal birth chart, even though I was born near 8 p.m., like it was almost 8 p.m., but because I was born at the height of summer, it was still daylight. So sometimes the time can be tricky, and you really have to look at the chart and see, is your sun below the descendant, which is on the opposite side of the ascendant. Again, so these are technical things that it might be easier if you have the visual in front of you. Just come back to it. You can also just plug it into astro.com or AstroSeek, and it'll tell you if you have a day chart or a night chart. I'm sure there's other websites out there too that'll tell you. So you don't have to do the manual work. But I think it's really great to do that so we can get to know our chart in a more granular way, and it becomes more personal. So the Feed Wild is a night chart. Now the difference between the two is that a day chart, if you have a day chart, then the luminaries that have the most, we could say, power and presence are the Sun, Saturn, and Jupiter. If you have a night chart, then the luminaries that have the most presence and power are the Moon, Venus, and Mars. And so even with those, we have a benefic and a malefic. In traditional astrology, we look at Venus and Jupiter as the great benefics. These are the ones that bring all the juicy good things in life that we actually want. Then we have the malefics, which are Saturn and Mars. Those are the planetary bodies that bring the things that we don't really want. Like, we don't want to experience that. For example, injury and anger and depression and challenges. It could express itself in a lot of different ways. Of course, it's not just for the sake of hardship and having a bad time. It's for our soul growth. All of it is so that we can grow as a soul and evolve. So I don't like to see them as, quote, bad, but they're not going to be easy. So anyway, when we look at the luminaries, if you have a day chart, then Jupiter is really phenomenal at helping you out, but also Saturn isn't as bad as it could be. Like if you had a night chart, then Saturn's going to be worse for you than if you have a day chart. Whereas if you have a night chart, then Venus is really magnificent for you in terms of its benefits. And the Mars is not going to be as, quote, bad. It's going to bring forth its qualities that are in higher expression, like power and its ability to move things and initiate, and that fire and that I am and that confidence, that kind of thing. Whereas Saturn is going to be maybe a little bit more crunchy for you if you have a night chart. So Feed Your Wild has a night chart, and that means that the luminaries are the Moon, Venus, and Mars. So then I want to look at those, and then we can look at the sun sign. So these are ways that I'm just painting a picture of what are the first things that I look at with the chart to build a story, right? To build a story of who is this being that is Feed Your Wild. And you can do that with whatever body of work that you have birthed, and whether maybe even your own child, right? Like a real human that you've birthed, or your own natal chart. Because I tell you, one of the most common questions I have is, well, the top two, what is my purpose in life? And number two is, what are my gifts? Because I work with a lot of healing practitioners, and they want to know what are their greatest gifts, their intuitive abilities, all of that. You can glean so much from the natal chart and to really hone in on the truth and the potential of your expression through the chart, because this is essentially your blueprint, right? But the blueprint is just a potential. There's the expressions, and that can come through lived experience and how the will, through your own will, right? So even the will of Future World Podcast and how it moves, but also planetary forces like transits, that things that we can't control, but that they cultivate a context or an ecology, if you will, that can allow for something to grow or express or initiate or to happen. So let's look at the moon. The moon is in the 9th house, and that is in the sign of Virgo. Well, the 9th house, so the moon here is the primary luminary, right? The moon represents, whereas the sun represents like sort of spirit self, the soul self, and the essence and like path and where you're going, the moon represents you and your incarnate being, your body, your emotions. Also, like in terms of masculine and feminine, the sun is more connected to masculine energy and within yourself, or yang energy. And then the moon is yin, feminine. And it also is connected to the divine feminine and goddess. So if we look at even, let's say, through the Vedic lineage, the sun is like Shiva and the moon is Shakti. So the moon expresses and reflects the light of the sun because Shiva is like all of consciousness, all encompassing. But the goddess and the moon is the embodied expression that lives through this expression, this earth, through your body, right? So all of that essence, but in this creative life force energy. And so the moon is connected to your body and to your emotions, your feelings, and physical expression on unconscious realms. Now, the moon being in the 9th house, the 9th house is the house of travel and foreign things, but it's also the house of education, of religion, of spirituality, and yes, of astrology. So here we have one of the primary luminaries and the divine feminine luminary here, and the embodied expression of the Future World Podcast is in the 9th house of spirituality and education and astrology. And that's basically what we do here, right? Like, hello, what are we doing today? And so that tells me, okay, I'm on the right track, right? Because sometimes we can think, oh, am I, focusing a little too much on the spiritual piece, or not enough on the like food and herbal piece, or am I placing too much emphasis on astrology, or like any of those types of things? I'm being shown, actually, you're right on target because this is where Future Wild actually wants to go. So that's another thing that you can look at is, where is your luminary sitting, or where's the luminary of your body of work sitting? In what house, in what sign is it in? And that can give you an indication of like, are you on the right track, or what direction does this want to go in? I also have what's called the lot of fortune in the 9th house. It's actually at the 0 degree of the 9th house, which is a really important place. And it kind of emphasizes this house and the themes of this house as it pertains to the lot of fortune. Now, I'm going to go on a little bit of a tangent here to talk about the lots, and then we'll come back, I promise. But I think it's a really fun piece that we don't typically look at in astrology, just like with a regular basics level reading, but one that I have found really, really helpful. So the lot of fortune is considered to be the most important of all of what's called the 7 Hermetic Lots. There's also one called the lot of spirit and the lot of eros. I'm looking only right now at the lot of fortune and the lot of spirit, so I'll talk about the difference between the two. But this comes from traditional Hellenistic astrology, and one of the most important Hellenistic astrologers from the 2nd century, Vedius Valens, describes this lot of fortune as the most influential and most potent place in the chart. And a lot of ancient astrologers considered it to be of equal importance to the sun, the moon, and the chart ruler. And so that's why I have brought it out for myself and for Future Wild. And plus, I've been working with this astrology for quite some time. Do you need to know any of this? No, there's so much that you can glean from just like literally coming back down to the basics. And even just using the 7 original planetary bodies, the traditional planetary bodies, which do not include the outer planets, such as Neptune, Uranus, and Pluto. Even without those, you can have such a potent, powerful reading and deep understanding. And I was taught to really work with those and get super familiar with those first before you start to expand out into the outer planets and asteroids and all that other stuff. But I thought it was kind of fun, and it's Future Wild's birthday, and Future Wild wanted me to talk about it. So here we are. But if this is perking up something for you, I highly recommend you just tune in. I'm trying to think of, Chris Brennan from the Astrology podcast has some amazing resources, and he teaches all about this because it's connected to foundational piece in zodiacal releasing, which is an ancient technique for prediction. And so he teaches that, and I think he has probably the best astrology podcast, and it's called the Astrology Podcast ever because it's so thorough and it's like a masterclass every single episode. So highly recommend you check that out, and I'll try to link him up below. But in terms of the lot of fortune, it's also called the part of fortune. It's not so much about like fortune, like, oh, Wheel of Fortune, or I get like a pot of gold, or like this like success in connection with wherever the lot of fortune lands. It's more nuanced than that. The lot of fortune really signifies more the things that concern the body. So your body, so that, yes, that includes like health and wellness as well, but also what one does through the course of their life. And it becomes indicative then of possessions that you have, reputation, and privilege. But this is one of the things that the concept behind this is that, and the story behind it is that this is kind of like the hand of cards that you were dealt prior to coming here. So this is very connected to fate. And like you have to work with the card that you were dealt, and you can't control changing it, but you can work with it. And so that's this concept. Now, something that's interesting is that wherever your lot of fortune is, you can also look at that specific house as like a secondary first house. So remember I mentioned the first house, which is where your ascendant is one of the most important houses because it's you. It's like literally the you of the entire chart. Every other house represents an aspect of your life, but doesn't represent you, whereas the first house does. Well, with the lot of fortune, then it kind of brings this secondary understanding of like another layer, a level. Whatever house it's in also becomes kind of like a first house for you. And then you can count from there all around. So with our natal chart, it's a wheel. So as an example, with Future Wild, lot of fortune is in the 9th house. And I mentioned that's the house of education, religion, foreign things, travel, spirituality, astrology, all that good stuff. And that is considered then the secondary first house, if you will, which is really significant because then the luminary of the chart, the moon, is in that first house along with the lot of fortune. And that means that those themes and then Virgo, which rules this house, become extra important. So you can utilize that too. Like, where does the lot of fortune land in your chart or the chart of your body of work? And that can be looked at as sort of like a secondary first house. And it's really important, those themes in that area of focus. Well, then you can count from there. So that would be the first house. And then the 10th house would be the second. The 11th house would become the third, and so on. So when I want to look at work, purpose, direction, a lot of times we look at the 10th house or the MC. And I'll get to the MC in a moment. But we look at the 10th house. The 10th house is the house of career, public image, actions, and reputation. If you have an empty 10th house, which on a personal level, on my personal chart, I have an empty 10th house. Don't fret. It doesn't mean that like you can't ever have a visible life. I can't remember which star it was. It's either Justin Bieber or Prince. I think it actually might be Prince who has an empty 10th house. Okay, Prince we're talking about here. Like Prince. So clearly, if you don't have anything in your 10th house, it doesn't mean that you're not going to be in the public light or have a successful career or anything like that. We want to look at the ruler of that house, the sign that rules that house, and then the planetary body that rules that sign, right? That's connected. And where are they? Because then they take on the themes of that specific house. So I'll get back to the Lot of Fortune thing and the delineation from that in just a moment, but I want to just share kind of looking at the 10th house through these different lenses. So the actual 10th house, when you look at your chart and you look around from your ascendant in the 10th house, look at that point and look at what is ruling the 10th house. Well, mine is Libra. You would also want to look at any planetary bodies there because those are going to indicate, that's going to give you information about what's maybe going on in that area. Well, for Feed Your Wild, there are no planetary bodies in the 10th house, but it's ruled by Libra. And Libra is ruled by the planet Venus. So then you want to go look at, well, where is planet Venus and what's going on with her? When I look at planet Venus, Venus is in the 6th house, ruled by Gemini. What is the 6th house? The 6th house is the house of health, of illness, and of work and employees or employee-employer relationship. What do we talk about in this podcast, or what was like the original impetus of this is like for holistic health. Feed Your Wild is to cultivate health on all levels, to connect you with your innate wildness and your connection with nature. And doing so with the energy of Gemini, which is all about communication, right? And an air sign. And Libra is also an air sign, which rules my 10th, or the Feed Your Wild's 10th house. And what is Feed Your Wild? It's literally putting a voice through the ethers, through air, a podcast, communication through air. So this is already demonstrating a little bit of that direction and that vibe, even like the modality and method of communication and marketing. The ruler of the house of career and public image is a Venusian, it's ruled by Venus, a Venusian sign, and Libra being so much about equanimity and values. And the messaging around it is 6th house information. It's about health and also looking at illness and the roots of illness too, so that we can build back up and cultivate healing. And it's also with that energy of Gemini and communication. So talking about the things and being on air about it with this Venusian quality, which is very feminine and nurturing and brought with beauty. So what's interesting is like when I was doing the branding too for us, it was very clear that the divine feminine through nature wanted to be expressed. Lots of green and florals, like ethereal feeling. And so as you can already see, like with the branding and with the sort of literally the voice and the messages that are coming through, how it is already expressed in the blueprint that is the chart. So that's one way that you can start to look at what wants to move through you, what has already been birthed, and are you on track, right? Are you off topic of things? So that was a question I mentioned before that I had, like, am I talking too much about XYZ? Like, oh, no, it's okay. It's actually in the chart. And does it feel right in my body to do so? Yes. Okay, so double confirmation. We're golden. Instead of outsourcing so much and thinking, oh, but what do people want to hear? Like, which is, yes, valuable. Like, I want to hear from you what resonates, what's helpful. But it has to first come from your resonance and then be met with those that are receiving it. It can't be 100% outsourced, and you can't spend all day thinking about what do they want. I need to shape everything to cater to the people, because a lot of times people don't know what they want, honestly. We don't know what we want. We definitely don't know what we need. And yes, sometimes we do, but it comes with life experience. And sometimes it's recognition. Like, I can't tell you how many times somebody has come to this podcast and be like, man, I didn't know I was looking for this, but this is exactly what I was looking for. And so that is when you've hit that signature, that unique signature. And that's the way you can start to glean from the natal chart and like really pull these pieces out. So let's keep in keeping with this 10th house theme. Remember I said that from the lot of fortune, wherever that lot of fortune is becomes kind of like the new first house, a secondary first house. And then you can count from there. Well, my lot of fortune is the 9th house, so that becomes the first house. So if I count around 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, the 10th house from the lot of fortune is the 6th house. The 6th house that I was already talking about, of health and of illness. Maybe someday I'll talk more. Well, I guess here I already am talking about the day-to-day habits and the work, like the nitty-gritty behind the scenes kind of thing. But that becomes the other 10th house. So then here it's almost like this reflection or mutual reception because, well, almost. We have the 6th house that becomes this sort of like new 10th house, which houses Venus in it and is ruled by Gemini. Whereas the 10th house from the ascendant is also ruled by Venus, well, has ruled by Venus, whereas the 6th house has Venus in it, and is ruled by Libra, another air sign. Anyway, it's like double confirmation here from both of those sides, which I think is really interesting. So if you're looking at how is this my body of work supposed to be represented, or myself, if you're looking at your own personal chart, you can look at the 10th house and again, look at the energy bodies, the planetary bodies that are in there. You can look at what is ruling, which sign is ruling that 10th house, and also where is the planet that's the ruler of that sign. Like Libra, the ruler is Venus. So then I went to go look for Venus because Venus holds the keys to my 10th house themes. And so the same goes for you, where you could start putting the puzzle pieces together to sort of get an idea of the flavor and if you're on the right track, if you've already started to do the work and be a steward of your creation. Then you can look at the MC. And the MC is typically connected to the 10th house because they're similar themes. The MC is the highest point of your charts. It's like the highest point of visibility, very often connected with career and path and sort of public life or how you are received by others. And in whole house signs, the MC is not always in the 10th house. Sometimes it's in the 9th house, sometimes it's in the 11th house. And for Feature Wild, it's in the 11th house. And the 11th house is about networks and friends and groups and hopes and dreams. And this is ruled by Scorpio. So this is an area where I think there's still like the potential hasn't been fully expressed. This is the exciting piece, right? When we find these elements of like, oh, here's a potential. And this is kind of like clues. But there's a myriad of ways that this can be expressed. And you can't necessarily predict what it's going to be. But again, it's about following your intuition and collaborating with this information. So when I'm looking at this, an MC in the 11th house, I'm saying, okay, well, my network and friendships and the friends that I make in these spaces and in groups is going to be really important as it pertains to the like visibility and the pathway of like the publication, like the Feed Your Wild podcast getting out there and what it's meant to actually do. Perhaps creating a community and a group is actually in order, which is something that I've been playing with, and I've been inviting you all to let me know if that's something that you're interested in as well. And in the sign of Scorpio, like Scorpio is not afraid to go deep. Scorpio is the shaman of the lot. Scorpio goes into the depths, right? Likes to dig up what is deep down in the dark and unearth it so we can heal it. Scorpio is highly intuitive, a water sign. And so this tells me, you know what? Like, we're going to go deep together. And maybe it's in my network groups or my friends or the groups that I hold space in. But when it comes to the podcast, like it could be cultivating a community or a network or group around that, or that it becomes some sort of access point to that, where a space where we can really go deep together and not be afraid to face our shadows and do the transformation work that's necessary in healing. I do want to call attention to the sun because even though it's not the primary luminary in the chart as a night chart, it's still incredibly important. And so the sun here is in the sign of Taurus in the 5th house. The 5th house is the house of creation, creativity, and procreation. So children and sex. But thinking about like even works of creation, like creative bodies, creating life through your work. That's exactly what I'm talking about, right? Like everything that we birth, even if it's just like an expression of our creativity, that is non-human, it has a life force. It has a signature and a consciousness. And that's what the 5th house is really about. So the sun here is in the 5th house in Taurus. And so this really connects to, well, first of all, this is a creation, right? A body of work that is being created consistently and has been birthed, but it's about creativity. Taurus is all about the earth and nature and nourishment and food and beauty ruled by Venus. So then when we look at the ruler of the 5th house, where the sun is, it's Venus again. So we come back to Venus and Venus being in the 6th house of health. It's all connected in terms of like what the focus of this podcast is about. Very clear. For me at this point, it's more confirmation, right? Because I've already been talking about this stuff, but it's very clear that I'm on target, right? With the themes and the topics expressed here. One thing that's interesting too is the lot of spirit. So remember I mentioned there's a few different lots, the 7 Hermetic lots. And we talked about the lot of fortune, where there's also the lot of spirit. And whereas the lot of fortune is a little bit more like this is sort of the fate that you were given. These are the cards that you were dealt. And this is something that has more to do with your body and health, but yeah, it can also connect to your possessions and your career. Whereas the lot of spirit has more to do with your spirit and your will. So your ability to carry out and to choose. Your response, like the agency of your free will, you see that more reflected by the lot of spirit. Whereas the lot of fortune is the hand you're dealt, the spirit is how you play your cards. And Kira Ryberg, I think is how you pronounce her last name. That's where I heard that the first time. And I thought, oh my God, that makes so much sense. So the lot of spirit, that's the one where we can really look at purpose. The lot of spirit is considered the placement to be the most indicative of someone's purpose in the chart. And it's like a foundational chunk of the seed of what that person or body of work is meant to express into ultimately, right? Because seeds are potentials. And depending on your will, your agency, but also the environment and the context, how you will grow and express will be influenced by all of that. This is one piece that I found really helpful when it came to looking at purpose. Like, what's the point and where are we going with this? The lot of fortune is kind of like foundational. Whereas when I said we can utilize the house that the lot of fortune is in as sort of the secondary first house and count from there. We still use the lot of fortune to do that as sort of like a foundational piece. But then we can look at, well, which house then does the lot of spirit fall in? So when I count from that 9th house, acting as if it's the first house, and I count that through, then the lot of spirit falls in the 9th house, which is really like technically the 5th house that's ruled by Taurus. But again, isn't that interesting that one luminary, the sun, is in the house that's considered the 10th house from the house where the lot of fortune is. And that's where the lot of spirit is. That's the purpose. And so this purpose of like creative expression in the sign of Taurus, connected to food and nourishment and nature and earth and agriculture and values. And also, it's considered the ninth house from the lot of fortune. And a ninth house is connected to education, religion, spirituality, astrology. And then the actual ninth house has the other luminary, the moon. You start to see where the deeper you get into the astrology, you'll start to see patterns. And you'll start to see the same thing, but expressed through different patterns or lenses. And there's a lot of self-referential pieces here. So already in multiple ways, this blueprint, the Feed Your Wild chart, is telling me I am here to talk about and be a luminary in the fields of spirituality and doing education while doing this, right? Astrology, nourishment, food, talking about nature, health, and healing and well-being. And this is everything we talk about. This is like the umbrella, the pillars of what we talk about. And it's very clear in the chart. Again, I know this can get super complicated when you're just listening and you don't have an image, or if you're just starting out, like, don't fret. This literally has taken me years for it to click. For others, it's like you might be a newbie and it clicks right away. That's what I find with a lot like younger people who come into this. It's almost like you're just sort of pre-programmed with an orientation for understanding this stuff, which is really cool. So, that'll help you get things faster. So maybe you're getting it. But if you are not getting it, like, please don't get down on yourself about it, because astrology is really complicated to me, even though it's simple ultimately, like in its archetypal structure, but it could get very complex very quickly, especially when you start adding other things in, like the lots. Oh my goodness, I haven't even talked about the asteroids. Maybe that's for another time. But there is so much, again, that you can glean even just from this standard. Well, you don't have to look at the lots. If you do want to, you can find those on astro.com and astro-seek.com. Those are the two places that I find that are easiest. They're free, and you can literally like pull up a natal chart and then select specific bodies that you want to see. And one of them can be the lot of fortune or par fortune. The astro-seek.com, I think you can actually just get a lots, like a natal chart with the lots, or zodiacal releasing, and that'll show you the lots. So again, if you want to work with somebody on this or do your own homework, Chris Brennan, as I had mentioned before, is a great resource. Notice I haven't even talked about aspects yet. Aspects are when we look at conjunction, which is when two planetary bodies are like right on top of each other or super close to each other, or squares or oppositions or trines. Like, all of those are really important. And yet, like, I haven't even gone into those. This is how much information and depth is available, even just sort of at the planetary bodies and the houses and the signs level. One last thing that I did want to bring in just as a touch, because I feel like it'll whet our palate, and then maybe we can have another episode that goes deeper in this. And also because I feel, well, here's one thing before I go into all of that. One thing has been clear for me, and that is when I look at the natal charts of the bodies of creation that I have birthed, the Feed Your Wild podcast, and my business, among other things, it's very clear the connection between myself, my natal chart, and the chart of what it is that I've birthed. I know we can see this with our children's charts and our own. We can actually see and refer to specific areas and planetary bodies as referencing our children or referencing our parents. Same goes for these charts. So I see a lot of myself in this chart. There's a lot of running themes that are similar. 6th house themes, 9th house, also 8th house, which I haven't even gone into. That's where the North Node is for Feed Your Wild podcast. 8th house is the house of death, of inheritance, other people's money, but also really it's like this space of liminality. It's like not afraid of being in that liminal space, that in-between space, and that sort of death process. So I'm not going to look at North Node or the 8th house, but I want to speak into this piece where it connects back to you and how you can find yourself and the roots of you in these charts of these beautiful bodies of creation that we have birthed. One example of this is with the asteroid goddesses. Now, the asteroids that I'm going to be talking about, just 2 of them, there were 4 that were initially discovered that were then named utilizing the names of goddesses. And that is Ceres, Juno, Pallas Athena, and Vesta. The sun in the Future Wild podcast, the sun in the 5th house in Taurus is square Ceres, the asteroid Ceres. And a square is a really potent aspect. It means that there's a lot of importance there. And it also, a square is usually a challenging aspect. It's a harder aspect in the sense that it's calling forth us to integrate something that might be challenging or to look at an inner conflict, or maybe it came from a challenging place. Well, Ceres represents the archetypal mother and the goddess of agriculture. Ceres gives birth to the world in physical form, and that means bearing children and also providing food for her children and their survival. So this is the mother archetype, and she stands for the principle of unconditional love and nurturing in all people. And in astrology, Ceres is connected to the foundation, the roots of something, and family. This is really important for me because the sun squaring my Ceres, well, it's not mine, this is Future Wild podcast. This is telling me the story that there's a challenging piece here in that connection with mother. And yet it was almost like the roots of this podcast are derived from her. And Ceres is, number 1, connected to the mother. And why did I start this podcast? The catalyst was my mom's own journey with illness, breast cancer, and her ultimate passing, her death. And Ceres is in the house of death. Ceres is in the 8th house of death that I just talked about. And she's squaring the sun of Feed Your Wild podcast. And she indicates the roots and the foundation of the spirit expression and the essence of this podcast. So this is really special for me. I mean, it paints the obvious picture of like something that I already deeply knew, but it's so uncanny, right? How these archetypes and these blueprints literally reflect back to us life and the truth of life. And you can find that in your own chart. You can find these inklings within the charts of like the origin story of your creation and the story behind that and the importance. I think it's also important that the Ceres, the mother, is also the goddess of agriculture, food, and nourishment. Hello, that's like been a theme here to what we've been talking about with food and nourishment and Feed Your Wild, literally. The other piece is that the sun is also trine the asteroid Vesta. And Vesta is in the 1st house. I mentioned her a while ago. Vesta, or Hestia, was Zeus's elder sister who never married. And in the mythology, she became the protectress of the hearth. So the keeper of the hearth and the sacred altar flame, the sacred fire. So she's the archetypal temple priestess. And she's a virgin in its original meaning, which is a being whole and complete in oneself, right? It's not about they haven't had sex. It's about they are untouched in terms of their spirit. And she represents the spiritual focus and the devotion to one's calling. And Vesta corresponds to the self. So here where we see the roots of this podcast emerged from a challenging experience of the death of my mother. And yet that expression that she also represented to me, which was the nurturer, the provider, like food, nourishment, agriculture. She loved planting and gardening and all of that. And yet the trine here with Vesta, Vesta's in the first house of self, and Vesta corresponds to the self. And she is that temple priestess that's reminding us of our spiritual self and devotion to one's calling. And that is part of the direction and path and purpose of what Feed Your Wild is here to do. So as you can see, these archetypes and how they show up in our own lives, but also in the charts of our creations and our own personal charts, can just shine a light, reflect so much back to us as confirmation, as, hey, look, this is actually one of the most important pieces of the story to remember or to hold or to share. Here's the direction. Here's the point and the purpose. Here's the flavor and the expression. Here's how you can show up. Here's the modality, right? Like literally I went point by point expressing all of that. And while if you haven't fully, like let's say you just birthed something and it's in the beginning, it's kind of like looking at your kid's chart and being like, okay, what are they going to be when they grow up? There's an unlimited amount of things that are variables that can be the final expression of what this blueprint holds. And yet there's still an essence. So what I would say is rather than utilize this to say, okay, it has to be a podcast or it has to be a video show or it has to be a book or whatever our mind wants to put things in boxes, what I recommend is tuning in, utilizing some of the ways that I'm looking at the chart to find the flavors, the rasa, which is like the juice, the nectar, right? The essence, the qualities. These are soul qualities. What are the themes that are popping up? And what are possible expressions of that? And then once you have that listed out and sort of like created a mandala with that, then tune into your body. Connect with the spirit and the deva of the creation and connect with your body. And begin to tune in and ask, like, body, tell me, show me, what's the next step? What's the direction? Because that is how you're being communicated to and through. And we can only know the next step. We can have the vision, and it's beautiful to hold the vision and like the dream and imagine, but we can only really see and know the next step. So that's what I'll leave with you. I hope that this was illuminating, educational, helpful, or entertaining at the least. And I'd love to hear your feedback. And if you like this, if this is something that you would like to see as a workshop or an offering even in navigating this, let me know. And I would love to hear your findings. What are you finding through your exploration? And please share over on Instagram. I'm at Wildly Rooted. I would love to hear and know. Well, I just have to give you a huge thank you for being on this ride and journey with me on the Feed Your Wild podcast. Over these past 6 years, whether you're new here or you're an OG, I gave an Akashic Soul record reading to a listener somebody who's been listening since 2019 and has been on their own journey. And my, oh my, it's so incredibly humbling and a reminder of why I'm showing up and doing this work. It's because of you. And this would not be possible without you. Like literally it requires your listenership and your energy and your presence. I feel it with every single Akashic channeling I do for the podcast. I tune in and I feel your energies. And so just my biggest heartfelt thank you and gratitude for your listenership, you receiving this and your presence and the energy that you give back Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm sending you so many blessings. And if you desire a reading, remember the discount ends May 1st, Beltane, end of day. And I would love, love, love to support you through these very interesting, beautiful, radical times. Sending you all my love and be well.